The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard outside Buckingham Palace. Tourists gathered behind the metal barriers, cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Sarah Mitchell, a 32-year-old mother from Manchester, holding the hand of her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Emma was not like other children her age. She had Down syndrome and autism, which made the world a confusing and sometimes frightening place for her. But there was one thing that never failed to bring pure joy to her face: soldiers. Especially the royal guards in their magnificent red uniforms and tall bearskin hats. Emma had been fascinated with them since she was 3 years old, watching videos on repeat, studying pictures in books, and talking about them constantly. Sarah had saved for months to make this trip happen. She knew how much it meant to Emma, who had circled this date on the calendar and counted down the days, with an excitement that filled their small apartment with energy. The journey from Manchester had been challenging. Emma struggled with changes in routine, and the train ride had been difficult. But Sarah held on to the hope that seeing the guards in person would make it all worthwhile as they stood in the crowd. Emma's eyes grew wide with wonder. She clutched her toy soldier tightly, the one she brought everywhere, its red paint chipped from years of love. Her small body trembled with excitement, and she began to rock back and forth, a movement that helped her process overwhelming emotions. Sarah held her close, whispering gentle words of comfort. But she could feel Emma's growing desire to get closer. The ceremony began with the sound of drums in the distance. The crowd pressed forward, phones held high, everyone wanting the perfect photo. Emma began to whimper, overwhelmed by the noise and the crush of bodies around her. Sarah tried to lift her up, but Emma was getting bigger now, and Sarah's back protested. She looked around desperately, hoping to find a spot where Emma could see without being overwhelmed. Then the guards appeared, marching in perfect formation, their boots striking the ground in unison. Emma's whimpering stopped instantly. Her mouth fell open in awe. She had seen them on screens 1,000 times, but this was different. This was real. These were real soldiers, walking just meters away from her. Her toy soldier slipped from her fingers, forgotten. She reached out toward them with both hands. Sarah bent down to retrieve the toy, and in that brief moment, Emma saw her chance. The barrier was right there, just a simple metal rail between her and the thing she loved most in the world. Before Sarah could stop her, Emma ducked under the barrier and ran into the restricted area. Her small feet carried her across the courtyard, directly into the path of the marching guards. Sarah's heart stopped. She screamed Emma's name, but her voice was lost in the crowd's collective gasp. Time seemed to slow down as everyone watched the little girl in the purple jacket running toward the line of royal guards. Her arms outstretched, her face lit up with innocent joy. Sarah tried to climb over the barrier, but security personnel were already moving. She was certain they would grab Emma, possibly frighten her, maybe even cause an incident that would traumatize her daughter forever. But what happened next was something no one expected. The lead guard, a tall man named Corporal James Fletcher, saw the little girl running toward his unit. He had been trained for many scenarios: protesters, security threats, medical emergencies. But this was different. He could see immediately that this child was special, that her movements and expressions told a story of pure, unfiltered love rather than any kind of threat. In a split second, Corporal Fletcher made a decision that went against standard protocol, but followed something deeper: his humanity. He raised his hand, giving a subtle signal to his unit. The perfectly synchronized march came to a gentle halt. The drums stopped, and in the sudden silence, everyone heard the little girl's delighted laughter as she reached the guards, her small hands reaching up to touch the red fabric of the nearest uniform. Corporal James Fletcher looked down at the little girl before him. Her eyes shone with tears of happiness, and she was making small, excited sounds that he recognized from his own nephew, who had special needs. Everything about her body language spoke of overwhelming joy, not fear or mischief. He could see her mother pushing through the crowd, terror written across her face, security guards rushing toward them from multiple directions. Fletcher knew he had mere seconds to make this situation right. He did something he had never done in his 5 years of service. He broke his stance, bent down slightly, and gave Emma a warm smile. The other guards followed his lead, maintaining their positions but softening their expressions. The little girl looked up at him with such pure admiration that Fletcher felt his heart melt. Emma reached out and gently touched the buttons on his uniform, counting them quietly to herself. It was a coping mechanism, Fletcher realized, something that helped her make sense of the overwhelming experience. He remained perfectly still, allowing her this moment. The crowd, which had been murmuring with concern, fell completely silent. Everyone was watching this unexpected scene unfold. Sarah finally broke through the line of tourists and ducked under the barrier, running toward her daughter. Her face was flushed with embarrassment and fear. She expected anger, consequences, perhaps even legal trouble. Instead, when she reached Emma, Corporal Fletcher looked at her with understanding eyes. "It's all right, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice kind. "She's not causing any harm." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching for Emma. "She just loves soldiers so much. She has Down syndrome and autism, and she doesn't understand boundaries. I only looked away for a second. Please, I'm so sorry." Fletcher glanced at the other security personnel who had arrived, giving them a slight nod that everything was under control. He then looked back at Sarah and Emma. The little girl was now tracing the pattern on his uniform with her finger, completely absorbed in the texture and design. She was humming softly, a sign she was happy and calm. "What's her name?" Fletcher asked Sarah, his voice gentle. "Emma," Sarah replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "She's been looking forward to this for months. She loves the Royal Guards more than anything in the world." Fletcher's expression softened even further. He thought about his nephew Daniel, who had similar challenges. He remembered how Daniel fixated on fire trucks, with the same intensity that Emma clearly felt for the guards. He understood what this moment meant to her, how rare and precious such pure joy was. "Emma," Fletcher said softly, making sure he was in her line of sight. "Would you like to see my hat?" Emma's eyes went wide and she nodded vigorously. Sarah started to protest, worried they were imposing too much, but Fletcher held up a gentle hand, carefully removed his bearskin hat, the tall ceremonial piece that weighed several pounds. He held it down at Emma's level, allowing her to touch it, to feel the fur, to experience it up close. Emma's hands moved over the hat with wonder, her fingers gentle despite her excitement. She made happy sounds, stimming by flapping her hands briefly before returning them to the hat. The crowd around them had their phones out, capturing this tender moment, but it was no longer about getting a viral video. People were genuinely moved by what they were witnessing. One of the senior guards approached Fletcher, and Sarah braced herself for the reprimand she knew was coming. But instead, the senior officer, Sergeant William Davies, surveyed the scene and made his own decision. He spoke quietly to Fletcher, and Fletcher nodded. Then Sergeant Davies addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest today," he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Young Emma has shown us what it truly means to admire the King's Guard. Today, we're honored to have her join us briefly in our ceremony." The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Emma looked around, not quite understanding the significance, but feeling the positive energy around her. She smiled her biggest smile, the one that crinkled her nose and showed all her teeth, the one that Sarah loved more than anything in the world. Fletcher placed his hat back on his head, and then, with Sergeant Davies' approval, he offered Emma his white-gloved hand. Emma looked at it for a moment, processing, then placed her small hand in his. Sarah was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the kindness these men were showing her daughter. With Emma's hand in his, Corporal Fletcher began to walk slowly, leading her alongside the line of guards. Sarah walked on Emma's other side, still in shock at what was happening. The other guards stood at attention, but with softened expressions, each one looking at the little girl with kindness rather than the stern faces they usually maintained. Emma walked carefully, trying to match the rhythm of Fletcher's steps. She couldn't quite manage the military precision, but she was trying so hard, her face scrunched up in concentration. Some of the guards couldn't help but smile at her effort. This was not standard procedure, not even close. But it was becoming something far more meaningful than any ceremony could be. As they walked, Emma began to speak in her own way, using the limited words she had along with sounds that expressed her feelings. She kept saying soldier, soldier over and over, the word she had practiced thousands of times at home. She pointed at each guard they passed, counting them, needing to acknowledge each one individually. Fletcher showed remarkable patience. He stopped at each guard, allowing Emma to look at them, to point, to count. Some tourists in the crowd were getting impatient, checking their watches, muttering about the delay. But many more were deeply moved, understanding that they were witnessing something special. Several people had tears streaming down their faces. Sarah noticed an elderly woman in the crowd, probably in her 70s, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. The woman caught Sarah's gaze and mouthed the words, "God bless her." Sarah nodded, her own tears flowing freely. She had spent so many years dealing with stares and judgments, with people who saw Emma as a problem or an inconvenience. This moment of pure acceptance and kindness was almost too much to bear. When they reached the end of the line, Sergeant Davies approached with something in his hands. It was a small pin, a replica of the guard's insignia. These pins were typically given to VIP visitors or special guests during formal ceremonies. He bent down to Emma's level, his weathered face breaking into a grandfatherly smile. "Emma," he said clearly and slowly, making sure she could process his words, "you are now an honorary friend of the King's Guard. We want you to have this to remember today." He held out the pin, and Emma looked at it with wonder. Sarah helped her understand, pointing to the pin and then to Emma's jacket. Emma nodded enthusiastically, and Sarah carefully pinned it to her purple jacket, right over her heart. Emma looked down at it, touching it gently, then looked up at Sergeant Davies and did something that surprised everyone. She saluted. It wasn't a proper military salute. Her hand was at the wrong angle and she held it too long. But the intent was clear, and the guards responded immediately. Fletcher, Davies, and several nearby guards returned her salute with full military precision. The crowd burst into applause. Many people, openly crying now. Emma started to rock back and forth again, overwhelmed by all the attention and emotion. Sarah recognized the signs and knew it was time to go before Emma became overstimulated and had a meltdown. She began to gently guide Emma back toward the barrier. Thanking Fletcher and Davies repeatedly, Fletcher walked with them to the edge of the restricted area. Before they crossed back to the tourist side, he bent down one more time and spoke directly to Emma. "You're a very special girl, Emma. Thank you for visiting us today. You made our ceremony better." Emma looked at him, really looked at him, making eye contact for one of the rare moments she ever did. "Thank you, soldier," she said clearly, using both words correctly in sequence, something she struggled with. Sarah gasped softly. Those were words Emma had been working on with her speech therapist for months, and she had just used them perfectly in the moment they were needed most. Fletcher smiled broadly. "You're very welcome, Emma." As Sarah and Emma crossed back into the tourist area, the crowd parted for them, and many people reached out to touch Emma's shoulder or speak words of encouragement. Some asked to take photos with her, and Sarah, feeling generous in her joy, allowed a few. Emma was still riding the high of her experience, stimming happily. Clutching the pin on her jacket, the ceremony resumed, and the guards continued their ritual with renewed energy. Fletcher marched with a lightness in his step that his fellow guards noticed. Even the stern-faced Sergeant Davies seemed to have a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. What had started as a potential security incident had become something beautiful. A moment that reminded everyone why traditions matter, but also why humanity matters more. Sarah found a spot where Emma could sit and watch the rest of the ceremony comfortably. Emma held her toy soldier in one hand and touched her new pin with the other, her eyes following the guard's every movement. She was tired but happy, the kind of happy that radiated from her entire being. After the ceremony ended, Sarah and Emma began walking back toward their hotel. Emma was exhausted but couldn't stop talking about the soldiers. She used her limited vocabulary to describe everything, mixing words with sounds and gestures that Sarah had learned to understand over the years. Sarah pulled out her phone and looked at the few photos she had managed to take, her hands still shaking slightly from the emotional intensity of the experience. As they walked through the park near the palace, Sarah noticed several tourists approaching them. a woman in her 40s, with an American accent, stopped them with tears in her eyes. She introduced herself as Margaret and explained that her son had autism too. She had been in the crowd and witnessed everything. "Thank you," Margaret said, her voice cracking. "Thank you for letting your daughter be herself, for giving her this experience. I saw how scared you were, but you didn't pull her back in anger. You let her have her moment. My son is 14 now, and I sometimes hide him away because I'm afraid of judgment. Watching you and Emma today reminded me what's important." Sarah hugged the stranger, both women crying. Emma, confused by the emotion, but sensing it was positive, reached out and patted Margaret's arm, offering comfort in her own way. The woman laughed through her tears and thanked Emma. 2. This scene repeated several times as they made their way through the park. People stopped them to share their own stories. Teachers who worked with special needs children, parents and grandparents of kids with various challenges, even some who simply said they had been moved by the kindness they witnessed. Sarah had never experienced such an outpouring of support. Usually, taking Emma to public places meant dealing with stares, whispered comments, and sometimes outright hostility when Emma's behavior didn't fit social norms. When they finally reached their hotel room, Emma crashed immediately, falling onto the bed fully clothed except for her shoes. Sarah gently removed her jacket, being careful with the precious pin, and covered her with a blanket. Emma was asleep within minutes, a smile still on her face, her toy soldier tucked under her chin. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowed herself to fully process what had happened. She opened social media on her phone and was shocked to find that the incident had already gone viral. Videos from dozens of different angles showed Emma running toward the guards stopping for her, Fletcher letting her touch his hat. The walk along the line, the pin ceremony, and Emma's salute. The comments section was overwhelmingly positive. Thousands of people were praising the guards for their compassion and flexibility. Many were sharing their own stories of children with special needs. Some were criticizing Sarah for not watching Emma more carefully. But those negative comments were quickly drowned out by defenders who pointed out how fast children can move and how clear it was that Sarah was a caring mother doing her best. One comment caught Sarah's eye. It was from someone claiming to be a former royal guard. The person wrote about how difficult it was to maintain the ceremonial stillness and protocol, how much training went into every movement, and how remarkable it was that Corporal Fletcher and Sergeant Davies had broken protocol to create this moment. The comment ended with, "This is what the Guard is really about, serving the people. All the people with dignity and respect." Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a message from her sister back in Manchester, asking if Sarah had seen the news. Apparently, the story had been picked up by several major news outlets. The BBC had posted about it. News programs were requesting interviews. Sarah felt overwhelmed. She had just wanted to give her daughter a special day. Now the whole world seemed to be watching. She turned off her phone and lay down next to Emma, stroking her daughter's soft hair. Emma stirred slightly, mumbling "soldier" in her sleep, and Sarah smiled. Whatever happened with the media attention, whatever people said, nothing could take away the pure joy that Emma had experienced today. That was what mattered. The next morning, Sarah woke to find Emma already awake, sitting up in bed and staring at the pin that Sarah had carefully placed on the nightstand. Emma reached for it, holding it like treasure, then looked at Sarah with those expressive eyes that could communicate so much without words. "Soldier?" Emma asked hopefully. Sarah shook her head gently. "Not today, sweetheart. We saw the soldiers yesterday, remember? That was our special day." Emma's face fell, and for a moment Sarah worried she would have a meltdown. Changes in expectation were hard for Emma, but then Emma looked at the pin again, touched it gently, and seemed to accept the situation. She had her memory and her token, and somehow that was enough. They spent the morning having breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Several diners recognized them from the videos and smiled warmly. One family sent over extra pastries for Emma, and the restaurant manager comped their entire meal. Sarah was uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the kindness as they were finishing breakfast. A hotel staff member approached their table nervously. "Excuse me, Ms. Mitchell. There's someone here to see you. A representative from Buckingham Palace."
Yes.
Sarah's heart jumped. Were they in trouble after all? Had the palace decided that yesterday's incident required official consequences? She looked at Emma, who was happily eating her third croissant, oblivious to any potential problem. Sarah's hands trembled as she followed the hotel staff member to the lobby. With Emma walking beside her, still clutching her toy soldier, in the elegant seating area near the entrance stood a woman in her 50s, dressed professionally in a navy suit, holding a leather portfolio. She had kind eyes and a warm smile that immediately put Sarah somewhat at ease. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Catherine Reynolds. From the Royal Household's Public Relations Office," the woman said, extending her hand. "Please, don't look so worried. You're not in any trouble at all. Quite the opposite, in fact." Sarah shook her hand, relief flooding through her. "I was so worried that we had caused problems. I know Emma shouldn't have crossed the barrier, and I'm truly sorry about that." Catherine smiled and bent down to Emma's level. "And this must be Emma." "Hello, Emma. I heard you made quite an impression on our guards yesterday." Emma looked at Catherine briefly, then back at her toy soldier, but she was listening. Sarah could tell by the way Emma had stopped moving, her way of focusing intently on something new. Catherine stood and gestured to the sitting area. "May we talk for a few minutes? I promise this is all positive." They sat down, and Catherine opened her portfolio. Inside were printed copies of some of the social media posts and news articles about yesterday's incident. "Emma's visit has touched hearts around the world," Catherine explained. "In just 24 hours, the videos have been viewed tens of millions of times. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, particularly praise for Corporal Fletcher and Sergeant Davies's handling of the situation." Sarah nodded, having seen some of this herself. "They were wonderful. So kind and patient. I'll never forget what they did for Emma." "The thing is," Catherine continued, "this has sparked a conversation about accessibility and inclusion at royal sites and ceremonies. We've received hundreds of messages from families with special needs children, thanking us and sharing their own stories. Many have said they avoid visiting places like Buckingham Palace because they worry about their children not fitting into the expected behavior norms." Sarah knew that feeling all too well. She had almost canceled this trip several times, worried that Emma would have a meltdown or that they would face judgment and anger from other tourists. "The royal household has been discussing this," Catherine said, "and we would like to do better. We want to make our ceremonies and sites more accessible and welcoming to all visitors, including those with special needs. And we were hoping you and Emma might help us." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Help you? How?" Catherine pulled out some documents. "We'd like to create special viewing areas at ceremonies for families with children, who have special need spaces where they can see clearly, but also have room to move, to stim, to be themselves without feeling pressured to conform to rigid behavioral expectations. We'd also like to provide sensory guides, visual schedules, and trained staff who understand neurodiversity." Sarah's eyes widened. This was more than she could have imagined. "That sounds amazing. We'd love your input as we develop these programs," Catherine continued. "And we were wondering if you and Emma would be willing to be part of a small media campaign about inclusion. Nothing that would overwhelm Emma, of course. Perhaps a photo opportunity, maybe a brief interview with you about your experience. We want other families to know they're welcome here." Sarah looked at Emma, who was rocking gently, content in her own world. She thought about all the times she had felt judged, all the places they avoided because she feared Emma wouldn't be accepted. This could help change that for so many families. "I'd need to think about it," Sarah said carefully. "Emma doesn't do well with too much stimulation or attention. But if we could do something small, something that helps other families feel welcome, then yes, I'd like to help." Catherine smiled warmly. "Of course. Take your time. Here's my card. Call me when you're ready, or if you decide it's not right for you. No pressure at all." They talked for a few more minutes about the practical details. Catherine mentioned that Corporal Fletcher had also been contacted and had agreed to be part of the campaign. The military was proud of how he had handled the situation and wanted to use it as a training example for other ceremonial guards around the world as they were wrapping up. Catherine reached into her portfolio and pulled out a large envelope. "Before I forget, this is for Emma, from the guards. Sarah opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a beautiful photograph from yesterday. The moment when Emma was holding Fletcher's hand and looking up at him with pure joy on her face. It had been professionally printed and mounted. Below the photo was a certificate, written in elegant calligraphy, declaring Emma an honorary friend of the King's Guard, and signed by Sergeant Davies, Corporal Fletcher, and several other guards who had been present. There was also a letter, written in simple language that Emma could understand with help. It thanked her for her visit, told her she was always welcome to watch the ceremonies, and invited her to write to them if she wanted. The letter was signed, "Your friends, the guards." Sarah's vision blurred with tears. She showed Emma the photograph, and Emma's face lit up with recognition. She pointed at herself in the picture, then at the guards, saying, "Soldier, soldier," with excitement. She held the photo carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," Sarah said to Catherine, her voice thick with emotion. "This means everything to us." Catherine squeezed Sarah's hand. "Thank you for sharing Emma with us. She's reminded a lot of people about what truly matters." After Catherine left, Sarah and Emma returned to their room. Sarah helped Emma understand the photograph and certificate, going over it multiple times until Emma seemed to grasp that these were her treasures to keep. Emma placed them carefully on the bed next to her toy soldier and her pin, her collection of precious things. 6 months passed, and life returned to its normal rhythm for Sarah and Emma in Manchester. The media attention had eventually faded, though people still occasionally recognized them in public. Sarah had worked with Catherine Reynolds and the royal household, providing input on accessibility features. True to their word, special viewing areas had been created at several royal sites. With sensory-friendly guides and trained staff, Sarah had also agreed to a small interview and photo session, which appeared in several parenting magazines and special needs advocacy publications. The message was simple. Emma's story showed that small acts of compassion and flexibility could make extraordinary differences in people's lives. Dozens of families had written to Sarah, sharing their own stories and thanking her for speaking up. Emma kept her treasures from that day in a special box by her bed. Every night before sleep, she would take them out and look at them. The photograph was worn at the edges from so much handling, but Emma treated it with reverence. She had learned to say "my soldier friends" when pointing at the picture, a phrase that made Sarah's heart swell every time. The toy soldier that Emma had dropped that day had been found by a tourist and turned into the palace lost and found. Catherine had arranged for it to be returned, along with a new toy soldier as a companion, this one wearing the exact uniform of the King's Guard. Emma now had 2 soldiers, and they went everywhere with her. One afternoon, in early spring, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Catherine Reynolds. "Sarah, I have something special to ask you. The King is hosting a garden party for individuals and families who have made contributions to various causes and communities. We would like to invite you and Emma. It's a small, intimate gathering. There will be several other children there, including some with special needs."
Ow.
Sarah's first instinct was to say no. The idea of Emma at such a formal event seemed overwhelming. But Catherine quickly explained that the party had been specifically planned with accessibility in mind. There would be quiet spaces, sensory rooms, and staff trained to help. Most importantly, Corporal Fletcher and Sergeant Davies would be there and had specifically asked if Emma could attend. After discussing it with Emma's therapist and carefully preparing, Sarah decided to accept. They practiced social stories, looked at pictures of the palace gardens, and talked about what would happen. Emma seemed to understand that she would see her soldier friends again, and that understanding helped her manage her anxiety about the new experience. The day of the garden party was perfect warm sunshine, gentle breeze, flowers blooming everywhere. Sarah had dressed Emma in a new dress, and Emma had insisted on wearing her guard pin. When they arrived at the palace gates, they were greeted by familiar faces. Catherine was there, and so was Corporal Fletcher. Though he was in regular ceremonial dress rather than full guard uniform, Fletcher's face broke into a genuine smile when he saw Emma. He bent down to her level, just as he had 6 months ago. "Hello, Emma. Do you remember me?" Emma looked at him, processing, then her face lit up with recognition. "Soldier," she said happily, reaching out to touch his uniform buttons, just as she had done before. "That's right," Fletcher said warmly. "I'm your soldier friend. I'm so glad you came today." The garden party was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. It was relaxed and welcoming. Yes, there were formal moments. The king made a brief appearance and spoke with several guests, including Sarah and Emma. He had clearly been briefed about Emma's story and spoke to her gently, thanking her for visiting his guards. Emma managed to look at him briefly and even attempted a small curtsy that Sarah had practiced with her, which made the king smile warmly. But mostly the party was about people connecting. Sarah met other parents of special needs children, sharing experiences and advice. She met teachers, therapists, and advocates. Emma played in the gardens with other children, supervised by staff who understood that play looked different for different kids. Sergeant Davies was there too. Now retired from active ceremonial duty but still involved with the guard, he sat with Sarah for a while, watching Emma play. "You know," he said, "that day with Emma changed something for us. Made us remember that our traditions are meant to serve the people, not the other way around. We've had more training now on flexibility and inclusion. Emma taught us an important lesson." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "She's taught me so much too. To be brave, to let her experience things even when I'm scared, to fight for her place in the world." "She has her place," Davy said firmly. "Never doubt that." As the afternoon drew to a close, Fletcher came to say goodbye. He presented Emma with one more gift-a photograph book that the guards had put together, showing different ceremonies, uniforms, and traditions. Each page had simple text that Emma could understand. The final page showed the photo of Emma and Fletcher from that first day, with the caption, "Our friend Emma, who reminds us why we serve." Emma hugged the book to her chest, then did something she rarely did. She stepped forward and hugged Fletcher. Sarah held her breath, knowing that physical affection was difficult for Emma, something she only offered when she felt truly safe and happy. Fletcher carefully returned the hug, his eyes shining with emotion. On the train ride home, Emma fell asleep with her head on Sarah's shoulder. The book clutched in her arms, her pin still fastened to her dress. Sarah looked out the window at the countryside, passing by and reflected on how much had changed since that uncertain morning 6 months ago when she had almost let fear stop her. From taking this trip, Emma had crossed a barrier that, literally and figuratively. She had reminded people that rules and protocols, while important, should never make us lose sight of our humanity. She had shown that accommodating differences doesn't diminish traditions. It enriches them. And she had taught her mother that taking risks, allowing Emma to be seen and known, could lead to beautiful things. The story of the little girl who crossed the barrier had become more than a viral moment. It had sparked real change in how public institutions thought about inclusion. It had connected families across the world who faced similar challenges. It had reminded countless people about the importance of compassion and flexibility. But for Sarah and Emma, the greatest treasure was simpler. Emma had met her heroes. They had seen her not as a problem to be managed or a rule breaker to be corrected, but as a person worthy of respect, kindness, and joy. That recognition, that moment of being truly welcomed and celebrated, was something Emma would carry with her always, as the train pulled into Manchester Station and Emma stirred awake. Sarah thought about all the barriers still out there, physical, social, institutional barriers that made the world harder to navigate for people like Emma. But she also thought about Fletcher's hand reaching out, about Davies' smile, about a king who took the time to speak gently to a little girl who saw the world differently. Maybe, Sarah thought, barriers could be crossed. Maybe one act of compassion at a time, one moment of choosing humanity over protocol. The world could become a place where Emma and children like her were not just accommodated but truly welcomed. It wouldn't happen overnight, and it wouldn't be easy. But it had started with one little girl in a purple jacket running toward the thing she loved, and finding that love returned in the most unexpected and beautiful way.